Hello, welcome to the Hope and Healing Center. I'm glad you all could be here today. I'd like to introduce our speaker, the Reverend Dr. Tommy Thompson. He is an ordained minister through the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ. He has spent over 30 years in full-time pastoral ministry, serving congregations in both the Houston and Dallas areas. He currently serves as senior minister of Bethany Christian Church, and he recently served for 8 years as executive vice president and chief operating officer of CanCare Inc., where he collaborated to create and implement innovative new programs, services, and training for both medical, clinical, administrative professionals and the patients they served. Welcome, Dr. Thompson.
Well, it's good to have all of you here, and let me just get a little tally of who's here. If you are a current patient or you're currently going through treatment, could you raise your hand? Okay, and if you are a survivor, finished treatment, okay, and thank you for doing that. Amen. And if you are a family caregiver, could you raise your hand? Okay. And if you're a professional caregiver, could you raise your hand? Okay, well, it's good to have all of you here. So we kind of have a variety of folks. My talk is going to focus primarily on the cancer journey and what I have learned over 30 years in working with people with cancer. So there are a couple of things that I want to say before we start today. First of all, I started this process back in 1986. I was actually doing some research in an advanced pastoral care class on the crises of the cancer patient. And I had just been invited to become a part of the American Cancer Society's clergy committee in the Dallas area. And I wound up serving on a statewide basis with American Cancer Society. And I found out that I have a real passion for people dealing with cancer. So I started this work in 1986, spent a whole semester studying the crises of a cancer patient, only to have both of my wife's parents diagnosed 2 weeks apart in 1987. So it was really timely for me to get started and understand what it is that they might be going through. We were their primary caregivers, and so we were there with them throughout that whole journey and learned quite a bit. So what I've learned over 30 years of working with people dealing with cancer is what I'm going to present to you. But here's the thing. I'm not an expert, and I'm not here to be an expert. I'm a facilitator. And I'm here to facilitate your conversation about your journey with cancer. So I invite you to participate with me today and to be part of this conversation in a personal way so that what we share together can be of benefit to you. You're the expert in your cancer journey. You're the one who knows what you think, knows what you feel, and knows what you hope for. So you're the experts here. I'm facilitating a dialogue, all right? So we're on the same page there, right? So please be aware that, come on in. It is. That what we're doing today is, what I hope to do is give you a structure, if you will, a way of looking at the cancer journey in a more structured way so it makes a little more sense, perhaps. Now, I've gone on and had a number of opportunities as a professional and as a family member to be a caregiver for those I love dealing with cancer. So again, this is partly, I will share part of my journey, but this is about you, okay? All of this today is about you and who you are in the face of this journey, okay? So I have decided, though, that there are 3 things that are essential for someone to be a cancer survivor, okay? 3 things. Are you ready for them? There they are. If you can do those 3 things the day after you've been told you have cancer, you're considered a survivor. The founder of CanCare, Ann Turnage, used to say, if you don't drop dead when you hear the words, you have cancer, you're a survivor. So survivorship in part begins with the mindset that I have in engaging this journey. But the thing that I want us to think about is, as we look at the journey of cancer, I want us to look at it in the sense that as in the human experience, we have 4 basic dimensions that we experience life in. And they are the physical, and you can see up there what we're talking about, the symptoms, the senses, everything that you experience in a physical way, right? So there are physical things about cancer like symptoms, actions that you take, going to the doctor, treatments that you undergo, side effects of the treatments, all of those things, right? Logistics of just making appointments and doing all of those things. Anybody been to MD Anderson? Or any of the major hospitals here, like Methodist Hospital, where you have a number of people coming in from all over the world, literally, to receive treatment. So cognitive, thoughts meaning perceptions and analysis. What is the number one perception of someone who's been diagnosed with cancer? I'm gonna die. Yeah. Or everybody thinks you're going to die. Yeah, you're going to die now. And that's not always the case, is it? In fact, we hope it's never the case. And in many cases, it's not the case. Again, the founder of CanCare, Ann Turnage, was diagnosed in 1973 with stage 4 colon cancer with widespread liver metastasis, and she is now a 52-year survivor, I believe, or 53-year survivor of that disease. Okay? And she didn't do it all at once, right? She did it one day at a time. So we have to think about what is it that's going on, right? And then the emotions, the emotional side, the feelings, the reactions. And I put that in there because a lot of times when something happens physically, that we have a reaction to it, right? We can't not have a reaction. And typically those reactions, before they become cognitive, are grounded in our emotions. Things like fear, worry, anger, grief. We're going to talk about some of those things today. And then the spiritual. And you can see that definitely our relationship with God is part of the spiritual. But when I talk about the spiritual, I want us to think about it in terms of how everything is connected. And that a lot of times our spiritual crises happen when something threatens to disconnect us. Does cancer threaten to disconnect you? What does it disconnect you from? Your normal life, exactly. And it also disconnects you from the future that you had created for your life that did not include having cancer, right? We all create a future story about our lives, and when we're diagnosed with cancer or our loved one is diagnosed with cancer, the future that we had planned that did not include dealing with cancer no longer is relevant. And it creates a sense of loss for us. So we're disconnected. Does that make sense? The fact that everything that connects us to our loved ones, to our purpose, all of those things are the part of the spiritual experience of cancer. So engaging these 4 dimensions is an important process as we're learning to cope with cancer. And we can do that by asking some very simple questions about ourselves, like, what's happened? What happened here? Okay, we're going to look at that in a minute. What do I think about what's happened? So you'll deal with your own perceptions as well as others' perceptions of what you're going through, right? Well, how do I feel about that? What are the feelings that I'm experiencing, right? And what is my greatest fear? What's your greatest fear? Death, absolutely. Or for some, it's suffering, right? And what am I hoping for? What do I want to see happen as a result of this journey? Completion, right? So it might look something like this. I have a persistent cough, or I feel a lump, or something is not right about me. And I am aware of it, and it makes me anxious. And so I think, you know what? I need to get this checked out. I'll pray it's nothing serious. Well, I go for what? Those tests and scans and biopsies and all of those things, right? And I get more anxious because something must seriously be wrong with me if they want to do all this stuff, right? But I still don't know what it is yet. I just know that they're doing all this stuff. So I think, something must seriously be wrong with me. I'll pray, or I'll need to get others to pray for me. Maybe I need to reach out to some other people and say, look, I'm going through this. Please be with me, right? So a malignancy is discovered. Now my anxiety turns to fear. I have cancer. Am I going to die? Treatment begins. Now I'm worried. What am I worried about? What's my worry? Pain. What's the big worry? Will they get it all? Will they be able to put me into remission, or at least control what my cancer's doing to my body? How much will I have to suffer as I go through this? So some side effects emerge. Anybody have side effects with their treatment? Neuropathies, nausea, just depends on your treatment. And by the way, I want to say a word here about treatment. Because one person has a specific side effect, that doesn't mean you will. And that's very important to remember. There's a great website called chemocare.com. Write that down, chemocare.com. It is part of the Cleveland Clinic. It's associated with the famous Scott Hamilton. And on this website, you can look up any of the medications that you're taking, and they will give you a list of the most common side effects, some unusual side effects that some people have experienced. And what I love is they'll also give you tips on how to manage those side effects. So be aware of that. There are so many resources out there. So side effects emerge, and I have despair. And I want to distinguish despair from depression. Okay? Depression is a chronic sadness. Despair is the absence of hope. And I haven't met a cancer patient yet, or in that case, a caregiver, that at some point in the journey didn't experience some level of despair. Because hope has to change in this process. That despair is distinct from depression. Right. Depression is chronic sadness. Despair is the absence of hope. I'm not sure I can stand this. The longer you're in treatment, the harder it becomes. I have a good friend that went through treatment for throat cancer, and this guy was a tremendous athlete. He was probably 10 years my senior, And we used to go to the gym together, and he would work circles around me. I remember one day he invited me to go to the spin class. Anybody here ever been to a spin class? Man, I had never been to a spin class before, and guess what? I've never been since. But this guy, we did an hour workout lifting weights. We did an hour spin class, and he asked me if I wanted to go lift some more weights afterwards. And I just looked at him and said no. But he was diagnosed and was going through treatment for throat cancer and was going through radiation and chemo at the same time. And I remember about the time he was ready to start his last week of treatment, he was standing by my office and he was leaning up against the door, hardly had enough strength to stand up straight. And he looked at me and he said those very words, "I'm not sure I can stand this. This is the hardest thing I've ever done." Now, guess what? He did it. And he's still alive today. Why must I suffer so much? Why does this have to be so hard? Well, we like it. Tumors shrink. The treatment starts to work. I feel relieved. Anybody ever felt relieved? I'm getting better. I have hope. Does this make sense? I was doing this program at one of our member corporations when I was with CanCare, and I had a lady come up after she said, "Have you been following me around?" So, as individuals, we experience cancer in those 4 dimensions, but we also experience cancer in relationship to our family. Cancer impacts our families, doesn't it? Changes our family dynamic, it changes our relationships. I was working with a guy who had pancreatic cancer, and I thought he wanted to talk about how serious his disease was and all the things that he had to go through. And when I went and sat down with him, he said, "The thing that hurts me the most is my youngest daughter has not touched me since I was diagnosed." And I said, "Really?" And he said, "Yes." He had 2 girls, 10 and 7. He said, "Would you come talk to her?" And I said, "I'd be happy to." So I went over to the house, and we got in a den, and he sat in his chair next to his IV pole, and his wife and his mother and I sat on a couch not too far from him, and his 2 girls came in and sat as far away from us as they could get. So I just started talking with them, and I said, "Tell me what you understand is going on." And they said, "Well, our dad has cancer." And I said, "Well, do you know what that is?" And they said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, what questions do you have?" And the little 7-year-old raised her hand and she said, "Can I catch it?" And I said, "No." And she got up and ran across the room and hugged her dad for the first time. I mean, it's just amazing how cancer can impact our families and what can happen when people understand what's going on, right? Not just physically, emotionally, but also cognitively and spiritually. Friends. I've had patients tell me, "Boy, when I was diagnosed, I found out who my friends were." Anybody here find out who your friends were? Did you find out who your friends weren't? Yeah, I mean, that's part of the experience. We learn about our relationships with our friends. And it can become difficult to maintain those relationships. But we can also be surprised by the people who emerge in our lives that we never knew cared so much, right? And then there's work. What about it? How many of you are working through treatment or having to take off work in order to go through treatment? So you have all of that in play, or maybe you're a part of an organization and you're not able to be as active as you would have been, right? The guy I was telling you about that had his children meet with me was a truck driver. And while he was going through treatment, his company put a desk in the warehouse because he couldn't drive his truck. And he would go and sit at that desk whenever he felt like it. And they would call him at work. He's at work. So they could keep his benefits going and keep his paycheck going. I just thought that was pretty awesome. And I've also had people just the opposite. I had a caregiver who was caring for her husband and was laid off because she missed so much work. I mean, it can happen. So we've got to learn how to balance all of that, right? And then community, okay? How many of you have had chemo and you've been limited in your ability to be out in the community? Anybody? Sometimes you'll be walking in the mall and you'll see someone wearing a surgical mask, right? And what do you think? Yeah, now you think cancer, but you at least think, well, they're probably sick. I need to what? Stay away from them. So how we are, our ability to be out in community and to socialize becomes affected. So we want to look at that, right? But also in community, it's where our resources are. Our hospitals, organizations like CanCare, American Cancer Society, Leukemia, Lymphoma, I can name a whole bunch. Susan G. Komen. All of those are out there, right, as part of the community. So the community can be a source of hope as well as a source of isolation. Now, all of that creates the environment that someone is dealing with cancer in, coping with cancer. That's pretty overwhelming, isn't it? I mean, when you think about it, that's a lot to keep in balance and a lot to cope with. So how do you do that? First of all, let's think about some questions. How is my family coping? How are they doing with what's going on here? Are my friends being supportive? Who is being supportive? How are things with my job? And will I be able to get out socially? And are there resources or challenges that resources can help me meet? So coping. Lazarus and Folk have defined coping as constantly changing efforts to effectively manage stressful demands. Everybody say that. Constantly changing efforts to effectively manage stressful demands. Was that as much of a tongue twister to you as it is to me? Yeah. So let's simplify it. What that means is what worked to help me feel better before I had cancer may not work now. And what works today may not work tomorrow. So I have to learn to do what I need to do to get through what? Today. And learning how to do that on a daily basis allows me to learn how to cope. Does that make sense? No one survives cancer more than a day at a time. Right? So I learned to get through today. Grief. Grief is the inward response to loss. Cancer represents a lot of losses, and we're going to look at that a little more. You've heard the expression denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross did some studies on that, and these were the stages of grief that she identified. That you don't go through these in a linear fashion. These are just stages that you might experience in dealing with loss, okay? And the thing is, we grieve every loss, no matter how big or how small, okay? Even if I lose my keys, there's going to be a grief response to that, period. May not be big because I'm not really attached to my keys except they get me where I need to go. So we grieve based on how attached we are to what we lose. And then mourning. And see, there's a difference between grief and mourning. Mourning is the work of grieving. What does that imply to you? What does the word work imply to you? Effort. Effort. Investment. Exactly. So it also says, there's something I can do to influence how I grieve. Does that make sense? Not control it. I can't control that I'm grieving, but I can do some things that influence how I grieve and how I get through that process. And hope. I want us to look at hope as a commitment to the future. Now, earlier we talked about what happens to our future story when we're diagnosed with cancer. What does it do? It dies, right? So now I have to think about finding hope again. And if hope is a commitment to the future, what does that mean? What is the future I'm hoping for? Absolutely. The other side of that is that hope is grounded in reality. Andy, of the people who's strongly influenced my life, had written a book called Hope in Pastoral Care and Counseling, and he really helps us understand what's going on when we're hoping and when we feel hopeless. And he says hopelessness attaches itself to unreality. Okay? Anybody here ever been in denial? Yeah? I was doing a program for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society several years ago. And I was talking about the idea that, we have to move from denial eventually. I mean, we do. We have to move from denial eventually. We can't stay there forever, though it does serve a purpose. And this young woman who had a turban on her head raised her hand and just kind of very gently said, "I'd like to say a word in favor of denial." And I said, "Thank you, because that's where you are. And it's not wrong to be there. Just understand you won't stay there. Eventually you'll move beyond that." And while that's scary, the other side of that is hope is grounded in embracing the reality of what's going on.
And we're viewing it, as I said,
In a positive, and we're going to talk more about that in a minute. Absolutely. So Dr. Lester says facing the reality of a given situation means accepting one's freedom to make projections into the future and create one's own future story. Make projections into the future and create one's own future story. When my sister was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, her world came crashing down. The first few months, she was numb. But something happened as she was going through her second round of treatment. And she decided she wasn't done yet. And so she put together a team to walk in the ovarian cancer walk to raise money for ovarian cancer research. And she had everyone on her clinical team sign up to walk with her. Everyone, including her physician, including her oncologist. And it was called Team Khaki. Her name was Kathy. My kids called her Khaki. And I'm telling you, something happened there. It changed her dramatically. And she chose to do something different as a result of it. She created a future that she wouldn't have had she not had cancer. It's amazing. Now this slide was used, one of our survivors from CanCare and I did a program for MD Anderson for their National Nurses Convocation several years ago. So we had nurses from all over the country, and this young woman and I spoke together at this conference. She is stage 4 breast to bone to brain. And she continues to be, after a decade, a strong survivor. So stage 4 breast to bone to brain. Now, the thing about it is, I have a bone to pick with her because she guilted me into doing the half marathon. Remember how I felt about going through the spin class? Well, I'll never do another half marathon. And she got me involved. She had done it the year before, and she said, if I can do it, you know you can do it. Well, what do you think's going to happen? I'm going to do what? Sign up, right? And then about 3 weeks before the race, she developed another tumor in her brain and told me she couldn't do the marathon. And the tumor, honestly, was treated very successfully. And she's gone on. She plays golf. She is out with her kids. She's moved to the Dallas area. Just an incredible woman. But this was her formula for survivorship. She said, this is what you need to be a survivor. You need, first of all, the medical treatment, right? You've got to have that. You need a positive, well, what was that? Positive attitude. A sense of humor. To be able to laugh. Awareness. Education. Support from places like CanCare, from friends, from family, from congregation, even from strangers. How many of you have been in a waiting room and struck up a conversation with someone else waiting for treatment and found it to be very helpful? Absolutely. A sense of who I am in relationship to my God, my faith. Networking. Anybody network? It's important to find out what else is going on and what other people know, isn't it? And hope. These were her keys for survival. Now, the reality is that what we're encountering when we go through a cancer diagnosis is what William Bridges has termed transition, okay? And transition is different than change, okay? Transition, he says, or change, he says, is driving to reach a goal. It's external. Now, no one chose to have cancer, right? You didn't plan on, I have yet to meet anyone that planned on having cancer. But nonetheless, it was something that happened external, and the goal now is to what? Get rid of it, right? Transition is letting go of what no longer fits. And frankly, we're really pretty good at change. It's that second part, letting go of what no longer fits. What does letting go imply? Loss, right? So I've got to learn how to do that. And the reality is, I can't have change without having transition. Change requires transition. And vice versa. Sometimes I get to a point where the way things have been going just don't feel right anymore. Has anybody ever experienced that? So that's a sign that you're in transition, when you have that feeling. At that point, then you've got to make a change, right? So those two things are very important. Understanding those are very important. So there are 4 major transitions in the cancer journey for us to look at. The first one is the diagnosis. You go in, the doctor says to you, you have cancer. Boy, my life's changed forever right now. Right? So now, and there's so much I don't know. I don't know where to begin to think or process everything that's happening, right? So there's this gap between my being diagnosed and when I'm actually staged and given a plan for how we're going to treat this. And sometimes that can take several weeks to several months, depending on your cancer and the urgency of your care, right? But once I get that, now I have to start preparing myself to engage that treatment, right? Then treatment fatigue. Remember the guy that I told you about that came and stood at my door and was just leaning against the wall? He had hit the wall. I had another good friend who went through treatment for a Merkel cell carcinoma, and he called me one day, and he could hardly talk. He had been going through the head and neck radiation. He said, "I've hit the wall." That's what he said. "I've hit the wall. I've got to figure out how to keep moving forward." And then finishing treatment. People don't realize, I think, how important that moment is. You ring the bell, you walk out of the radiation center or the infusion center, and everyone says to you, "We wish you well," and then what? And then what? What happens next? You have to go on with your life, but there's that sense of, I've got to figure out what that looks like and how I'm going to do that. I mean, after all, I've had this treatment and these physicians caring for me up till now, and now guess what? It's all up to me and my body's already let me down once. So I've got to figure out how to make that part of my life going forward and move forward with it. I love this quote from Morrow. I think most everyone knows her story, right? She said, "I do not believe that sheer suffering teaches. If suffering alone taught, all the world would be wise, since everyone suffers. To suffering must be added mourning, understanding, patience, love, openness, and the willingness to remain vulnerable."
We find your feelings.
Yeah. So the work of grief that we talked about, which is called mourning, is the work of transition. And there's a British psychologist whose name is John Bowlby. And John Bowlby, remember I said that we grieve based on how attached we are to something. John Bowlby was the one, along with his partner and a few others in Britain, that did the research on how attachment influences how we grieve a loss. Okay? And he decided that there are 4 phases of mourning that we go through. William Worden, on the other hand, looked at it in terms of tasks. He said there are 4 tasks. Remember we talked about grief work. So when we work, we do what? We do tasks, right? So these are things that I can do to help influence how I'm progressing through this journey. How are we doing on time? Okay? Okay. So the first phase for Bowlby is shock and numbness. Anybody experienced that? Yeah. You have cancer. What do you feel? Are you sure you're talking to me? Helpless. Yeah. And numb, right? Anybody ever felt numb? So the task is to learn to accept the reality of what has happened. Hope is grounded in what? Reality. So my task is to simply accept first the reality of what's happened. Second phase is yearning and searching. Okay? I just want things to be right again, right? I have to choose to feel the pain. I have to choose to go through this. Then there's disorientation, because life has just totally changed. The things that I had oriented myself around, many of them are no longer relevant. So now I've got to figure out what life's all about. So I adjust to life with this new reality. I go to the treatment. I remember my sister would go to treatment. When she first started going to treatment, it was really hard, but there was a point at which she almost looked forward to being at treatment, because that's where her support system was. I mean, she looked forward to that. She made an adjustment. She had a sense of reorientation, and she used her new energies to form that team to walk in the ovarian walk, to raise money, to do something, to make a difference. So that's that reorientation and reinvesting. So it might look something like this. I can't believe this is happening to me. Right? I have cancer. I don't want to go to treatment. I just want things to get back to. I will go to treatment and do what I must for as long as it takes. I don't remember what life was like before cancer, nor do I know what it's going to be like afterward. But I'm learning to cope. Remember, coping is getting through what? Each day. Getting through today. And I'm learning how to do that and not be disappointed in myself if something I tried yesterday doesn't work today. But just know that I have to do something different. So I'm learning to cope, and I can make this work. I've done it. I'm a survivor. I want to give back to help others. Does that make sense? So the goal of grief and mourning is reconciliation, learning to live with what I cannot change. How many of you know the serenity prayer? God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So here's some important questions for us to consider as we're beginning this journey. What no longer fits? All right, you're going through your cancer journey. What no longer fits for you that fit before? You don't have to answer. I'm just asking you to reflect on it for yourselves. As caregivers now are called co-survivors. Did you know that? Yeah, co-survivors. What no longer fits? What must I accept? What can I not change? I cannot change that I have cancer or my loved one has cancer, right? What can I change? The future, absolutely. Let's look at some things that we can change. And by the way, what I'm about to show you comes from a program called Powerful Tools for Caregivers. It's a program out of Portland, Oregon that we do here in Houston. We've been doing it here in Houston since 2009, and it's a powerful program for caregivers, family caregivers. If you're interested in learning more, see me afterward. But changes I can make. I can change a situation, right? So if you're at work, your employer is required to make accommodations for you if you're going through treatment and can't do what you used to do. You're now covered, I don't know if you know this, cancer is now covered under the American for Disabilities Act. And companies are now required to make adjustments for you if you need them to accommodate your needs when you're going through treatment. Change my perception. The perception of cancer is, I'm going to what? So how do I change that perception? I'm going to live and I'm going to beat this, right? I can change my response. Okay, when people ask me, how do you feel? Anybody go through that? How are you feeling?
Well, looking for what?
Yeah, I asked you that when you walked in. Right, but I mean, think about it. You know, how do I respond to that? And then I can change my what? Attitude. And our attitude is the way we mentally look at things. That's what we were talking about earlier. Is the glass half full or is the glass half empty? I saw an email the other day. Somebody sent me one of those, emails. And you know what I'm talking about, right? Those emails? Okay. And it said, people who look at this way don't get it. He said, the glass can still be emptied or it still can be filled. I mean, it's that, we have a choice with what we do with it, right?
It's the cognitive and perspective.
Cognitive and perspective, right? I love this quote from Walter Anderson. He said, although I may not be able to prevent the worst from happening, I am responsible for my attitude. toward the inevitable misfortunes that darken life. Bad things do happen. How I respond to them defines my character and the quality of my life. I can choose to sit in perpetual sadness, immobilized by the gravity of my loss. Or I can choose to rise from the pain and treasure the most precious gift I have, life itself. Right? So, tools for a positive attitude. First of all, view setbacks as temporary. I've worked with a lot of people going through treatment for cancer. Inevitably, you have ups and downs. And so you want to be sure you're not letting the downs be a predictor of everything that's going to happen next. But you're managing your attitude about those things. Today is a bad day. Tomorrow, we hope, will be a what? Better. I just went through open heart surgery here recently, and I learned that personally. There were days that I just did not feel well. But then there were days I felt great. And I still have those ups and downs, right? View misfortunes as specific, not universal. Have you ever heard someone say, everybody hates me? Anybody? That's an example of how we make something universal. It's just not true, right? So what is that's happening specifically? Seek solutions to problems. My dad used to tell me, you're either going to be part of the problem or you're going to be part of the what? Solution. View mistakes as opportunities. You ask any successful person, and I guarantee you, they learned more from their failures and their mistakes than they did from anything else. Give yourself credit. Please give yourself credit for what you're doing and your ability to fight this disease. Acknowledge the courage that it takes to get up and put on your clothes and go to the infusion center or the radiation center for yet another treatment. Give yourself credit for the willingness to be out in public and let people come up to you and ask you to tell them about how things were going. Give yourself credit for the ability to stand with your family and let them love you. Recognize that beliefs are not facts. And practice positive self-talk. How many of you know the poem about the little engine that could? It works, doesn't it? I mean, it really does. You think about it. So planning for the future. What is next for me? How do I figure that out? Think about it. My next goal is, and let me say a word about future. Most of the time, we measure future in years and decades, don't we? How many of you are planning next summer's vacation? Yeah, we kind of do that. We think about planning ahead and that our commitments to the future are down the road. Anybody here saving for retirement? I am. But think about it. Now you're spending it, okay? Anybody thinking about how you're going to spend your retirement? Yeah, so think about it. When you're going through treatment for cancer, the future is often measured in minutes and hours. If I can just get through this next treatment. Right? Nonetheless, you're making a commitment to and that is hope. That's how we learn to live hopefully in the midst of this journey. So when you ask yourself, what's my next goal? Please don't start thinking that I've got to plan, years in advance. It might just be, my next goal is to get through today and have a good day. Well, what can I do? What steps can I take to reach that goal? What is it I specifically need to be doing to reach that goal? And then finally, this week I will, or today I will, right? What am I going to do?
Short-term goals.
Pardon me?
Would you say it's confined to short-term?
No, I'd say you can do this for all of them. In fact, when we do this class, we actually have people set goals for 3 months. But we want everybody to understand that however you can measure your future is okay. You don't have to be thinking months down the road. You can be thinking minutes or hours down the road. The point is, when I'm making a commitment to the future, I have what? I have hope. Does that make sense? And hope is essential for life to have meaning and purpose. Okay? I want to thank you for your time.